Hello, my name is Dr. Joeseph Wanland, Chief Scientist of the U.S. Department of Scientific Intelligence, or the SHOP as inappropriately nicknamed by the radicals that seek to make our name and to an extent my research look bad. If you stumbled upon these recordings, I was either been dead or erased by said organization, or at the hands of the people who saw my acts as perceived cruelty. Within these recordings is a diary of my recent experiment revolving around 3 individuals and the compound we tested them on. February 1963. We took the body of Specimen Zero, aka Ralph White, from the morgue after the autopsy. The body was mangled pretty good, but luckily the brain was intact long enough to extract the pituitary gland, which we needed for our experiment. We tested Lot 1 on a group of Rattus norvegicus, or the common brown rat. The results were very stunning, as 90% of them were able to learn at an accelerated rate. Unfortunately, the other 10% succumbed to cannibalism. I do not wish to go into further detail. June 1967. Using the data gathered on Lot 1, we were able to synthesize the proper chemicals required for Lot 2, so Specimen Zero was no longer needed. Although I insist we must find more individuals like him to properly understand what causes these abilities, myself along with 2 agents proceeded to Chamberlain, Maine to bury his body in his empty plot. Once we were finished, we witnessed a magnificent event. A hail of stones were raining down upon the town, the bulk of which was focused on one residence. Against orders, I took it upon myself to get a closer look. To my surprise, the bulk of the stones landed on the residence of one Margaret White, wife of Specimen Zero. I asked the locals what was going on, and I got interchangeable stories, but each one with the same conclusion. Somehow, Carrie did it. I believe the Carrie they were referring to was 4-year-old Carrietta White, the daughter of Margaret and Specimen Zero. I have come to the hypothesis that Carrietta may possess similar abilities to Specimen Zero. This gives me the undoubted conclusion that these phenomena could be hereditary. However, further outside observation should be required before myself or any successors of mine could borrow the child. July 1967. As soon as I got back to the HQ, I put my hypothesis into play. However, upon my discovery, I found that all but 2 of the rats have suddenly dropped dead. Upon further inspection, I noticed that the blood came out of their nose, leading me to believe that they all died of a massive brain hemorrhage. Fortunately for me, the survivors were of co-ed gender, so it wasn't hard to experiment using what I saw. Rather than make them mate by force, I used the new radical treatment of artificial insemination to speed things along. Adding further to my curiosity, I injected the growing specimen with Lot 2. This was so I could see if, aside from hereditary traits, that maybe the experiment would succeed at an earlier age. Upon further notice, I shall call this specimen 1, and the gland it may develop Lot 3. August 1967. Lot 2 was a success as Specimen 1 not only learned faster than the other rats, I noticed that it was fixated on my coffee cup. Before I could react to it, it fell over. I believe I may have accidentally unlocked a power that many would have believed to be limited to fantasy novels. Telekinesis is what they call it, a phenomena that only was originally considered to be the work of spirits or poltergeists. I never believed in that sort of nonsense until now. I extracted the gland that would one day be known as Lot 3. September 1967. The department was insistent that I hurry along with my experiments so that way it would be okay for human trial. Despite my warnings, I obliged. Using the gland I extracted from the rat and mixing it with what was left of Specimen Zero's, I was able to quickly conceive Lot 4. I tested it on fresh specimens, which I would call Specimen 2 and 3, which was instead of rats, literal guinea pigs were used. Unfortunately, the results were unpredictable, but at the same time similar to my previous works. They didn't take to Lot 4 as well as much as the surviving rats, but they were still alive. Using similar methods I used on the rats, I conceived a child guinea pig, which was developing the natural Lot 4 gland. While I put the Lot 2 gland inside, and this specimen 4 was born and Lot 5 was created. January 1968. I used my holidays to further observe Specimen 4, who seemed to be developing well, unlike its parents, who sadly passed away. The cause of death was the hemorrhage mixed with overexhaustion. It seems constant use of the new powers were the cause. Specimen 4 seemed to react to things as if it knew what was going to happen. When I took a syringe I was planning to use to extract the gland, it ran to the furthest corner away from me. I come to the hypothesis that its increased intellect made him recognize the tools they used and reacted accordingly, but I do not rule out the possibility of telepathy or precognition. September 1968. It took me 8 months, but I managed to get Specimen 4 off guard. I extracted the gland and took a sample out from my microscope. Upon observing the sample, I noticed some odd amounts of nerve firing coming from the mere sample alone. I believe these particular nerves are in constant flux, which in turn caused me to hypothesize that this might be a stepping stone to the answer of why these abilities are possible. I decided to mix the fresh gland with my previous extractions, including Lot 1, ergo creating Lot 6. Further research is needed. February 1969. It is now the anniversary of the creation of Lot 1, and the department saw fit to undergo human trials without any testing and research. I barely created this fucking thing, they already wanted to test it. However, I was not all defeated, as I was insistent on witnessing this first trial myself. It wasn't hard to get volunteers, as college kids would do anything for a few bucks in their pocket. June 1969. We decided to hold the experiment at the end of the school year. That way, regardless of what happened, those kids would get a good enough rest before further testing. There were 12 volunteers, each one of them college students. It was rather amusing, as I felt like a teacher explaining the procedure as if they were my own students. And much like typical students, their questions were also amusing. One caught me off guard, though. Rava, I believe his name was, asked me if the experiment was run by the shop. Needless to say, I didn't quite care for his attitude, but I obliged and said no. It was bullshit, but he was satisfied with the answer either way. As with the test, we assured the students that only half of them would get the Lot 6 through the double-blind method, in which half get the Lot 6 while the other half gets just distilled water. Now, in a normal DB method, we would simply not know who gets what. But we really know damn well that the Lot 6 was injected to all 12. As Lot 6 began to take its toll, we noticed some rather strange effects. At first, at least in all my research in hallucinogenics, it seemed no different than the average LSD trip. But one person's question intrigued me while he was under the effects. Andrew McGee asked me while under if he was supposed to shrink. I naturally assumed it was part of the hallucination process. As I looked on, I noticed Andrew, or Andy as he liked to be called, was staring at another subject and vice versa. The subject in question was named Victoria Tomlinson, or Vicky for short. But that wasn't important. What was, on the other hand, was the expression on their faces. It may have just been coincidental, but it seemed like they were having a silent conversation with one another without ever opening their mouths. I remember reading about a similar event in an old news clipping about a nightclub burning down. A young man, Richard Halloran, heroically saved many members of that nightclub in the 1930s while it was burning down. During the interview, he relayed a story about being able to talk with his grandmother without ever speaking aloud. He called it shining. I didn't believe it at first until I saw it there with my own two eyes. Last I heard of him, he was working at the Overlook Hotel as their cook. Hollister recommended I vacation there, but my research was too important. Though I was curious about their Rocky game. Before I could make further observations, my assistants called to my attention. It was difficult for me to describe, but 9 out of the 12 subjects committed suicide in the most gruesome methods, leaving 3 to survive, but one may as well have died. Rava was saved, but not before he did some damage. His eyes were missing and bloody empty sockets replaced them. My assistants claimed that he was trying to claw them out. Before we sedated him, he just kept saying, "I keep seeing them, they won't go away. I keep seeing them, they won't go away." Now, this might be jumping the gun, but I believe that Reva proved my precognition theory right. However, tragically, it cost him his eyes. When I looked back on Andy and Vicky, I noticed they were holding each other's hands. I was curious to see how far this would go. We confined Andy and Vicky to a separate room in the college. It seemed prior and after the test they had no recollection of what went on. This was further proven when we told them what happened to the other subjects, as they reacted as if they just heard the news. While I calmed them down, one of my assistants was lighting a cigarette not too far from them. Andy looked at them with a gaze I can only describe as hypnotic, and he said in a casual tone, "You know, you really ought to quit while you're still young." My assistant flinched as if something hit him in the eye. Before I knew it, he threw his cigarette away. I at first thought he was listening to helpful advice, but then I saw after throwing it away he reached into his breast pocket and took out a pack. Marlboro, as I believe it would be. He threw it in the trash. It seems Andy has a type of power suggestion not too uncommon among many magicians and hypnotists. However, unlike them, which require time for practice, Andy was able to do it in mere seconds. I proposed to them in exchange for our further testing and research. They not only get the money they were promised, but the two can have their own house with all expenses paid. They seemed reluctant at first, but agreed since both were broke and didn't seem to want to leave one another. The two subjects, now named Andy and Vicky McGee, were wed, and among their guests and friends, I myself attended the wedding along with many shop agents. Prior to this, I noticed further developments in both Andy and Vicky's abilities. Both were telepathic, but Vicky was also telekinetic, and Andy was able to develop his suggestion power, or push as he liked to call it. But not all was positive, as I found out during a routine test that Andy suffered a massive hemorrhage and collapsed. Fortunately, he lived, but we learned that it was because he strained himself while using it on a mind that was stronger than any of the usual subjects. It was unknown if Vicky suffered similar effect, as all she described upon use was minor headaches. We also got to observe their lives outside of testing. We found that Vicky was now a child, a possibility I never quite seen but was never too surprised. Much like the rats, I was curious to see the potential in this child and what she could hold. September 1972. 9 months after conception, Charlene McGee was born, or Charlie as the parents preferred. At first, upon inspection, she seemed no different than that of a healthy, ordinary infant. However, to my shock, there seemed to be more than met the eye. I received a call from Andy, who told me the whole story. During a routine feeding, Vicky was late for the bottle, which was common among new mothers. However, the result was more catastrophic. As soon as little Charlie started crying, one of her stuffed toys began to emit smoke before bursting into flames. I came to the house right away and observed the destroyed toy. There was no sign of any outside influence, no matches or lighters of any sort. Upon examination, I concluded that whatever caused the fire happened from within the toy. I could be wrong, but I advised Andy to set up every room in the house with at least one fire extinguisher. But if I was right, there may be a chance that little Charlie is pyrokinetic. Upon reporting to Hollister, he had 2 shop agents observe the McGee household for further activities. I strongly suggested that they let the McGees know in fear of compromising their cooperation. I was overruled. Not that it matters since they may know anyway. April 1979. It has been 7 years since Charlie was born, and she began to experience certain traits. First of all, she was ill-tempered, which made her quick to anger whenever someone wronged her in some way. This was especially bad, as each time she threw a tantrum, something or someone would catch on fire. Other than that, she was a sweet kid and very bright. She learns very quickly and understands as much as an adult does. She also has an undying sense of loyalty to her parents, with only a few rebellious exceptions. One such exception was due to a routine training exercise. Her father insisted on training her himself to better control her pyrokinetic abilities. He succeeded for the most part, as Charlie was able to concentrate her abilities on a fixed point, such as turning bread into toast. However, what he couldn't do was get her to pull the power back or decrease it in any way, which led to her unintentionally setting Vicky's hands on fire during a recent tantrum. It seemed now was the time to bring them into our main headquarters. Hollister had special interest in Charlie specifically due to her being able to use her powers without suffering any ill effects Andy and Vicky have suffered from. May 1979. I had just received news that Carrie White had passed away. Upon reception, I took the next trip to Chamberlain to find in my horror that most of it was burned down. According to eyewitnesses, they claimed that Carrie herself took it upon herself to destroy the town, starting with the local high school. She was covered in what was described by surviving students as pig's blood, most likely due to a prank. I called Hollister, who in turn had agents come down to extract the body. I could be mistaken, but I believe they planned to use it to make it for the bases of Lot 7. Upon investigating the carnage, I had a small epiphany. If a little girl with telekinetic abilities could grow up into a teenager with a power that can devastate an entire town out of sheer anger alone, imagine what another little girl would do with the power of fire on her side. I returned back and, oh my God. Upon finding out their attempt to extract Charlie, I found out that Vicky was murdered. Andy and Charlie are missing in action. I may have been too late to warn Hollister. Oh, God. July 1979. This is my final entry of the Lot 6 project. I'm resigning from the shop. After warning Hollister of the potential danger that I hold myself responsible for, he scoffed at me, arrogantly flaunting his trump card, John Rainbird, an assassin who among specific traits was known to be an expert at tracking. Hollister hired him to track down and extract Charlie and Andy. Oh, God. Just by looking at the man, I knew he was quite out of his mind, too. Upon leaving the room, I overheard him eagerly wanting to personally execute Charlie as soon as they were finished testing. Rainbird's a sick bastard, and it doesn't take a doctor to know that. Upon finishing this recording, I plan on using all my research papers to expose this department for what it really is. May God forgive me for what I unleashed upon this world.